In the Miller family, I learned young that silence wasn't just survival, it was expected. By the time I parked on the gravel loop in front of the house, the sun had just started to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the estate's white columns. The windows of the colonial mansion glowed with a warm, curated hospitality, Pottery Barn perfection. But the air always felt colder when I stepped out of my car here. Claire used to call it the house of small disappearances. My shoes off at the door, my voice lower at the table. My opinions clipped short with polite smiles. Even now, my palms sweated against the steering wheel before I forced myself to grab the pie I baked and walk in. Inside, Helen greeted me with the kind of hug that touched only fabric, not skin. "Danica, sweetheart," she said softly, eyes already darting over my shoulder. "You look, well." "I brought Grandma's pie," I offered. "Oh, how lovely," she said, then added, "Just leave it in the second fridge in the butler's pantry. We may not need it, but thank you for thinking of it." The phrase, "we may not need it," clanged through me like a dropped dish. I moved quietly down the hall, past family portraits where my brother appeared in every milestone. Eagle Scout, prom king, MBA grad. While I, the oldest, had vanished after high school graduation. The house buzzed with preparations for the 4th of July BBQ. A caterer wheeled in crates of wine. Bradley's voice boomed from the back patio, loud and boyish as always. I peeked through the kitchen window and saw him, shirt sleeves rolled, charming our father's business associates with some story I'd already heard 4 times. "Redundancy planning," Walter was saying with a clap on Bradley's back. "That's what this family needs, and Bradley's got the mind for it." I waited for someone, anyone, to mention the proposal I'd sent 2 weeks ago. A visual redevelopment plan for the old dairy barns. But of course no one did. I turned to leave the kitchen and caught Claire leaning against the doorframe. Her lipstick was fresh, her eyes sharp and dry. She gave me a look that was half amusement, half warning. "They've already decided who's in the photo," she murmured. "They always do." She nodded and pulled a thin manila envelope from her bag. "Found these while clearing old files at the county office." Her tone was nonchalant, but her eyes pinned me. "You may want to keep this." I took it with a slight nod, tucking it into my purse without opening it. Claire never said what didn't need to be said. It's what made her both dangerous and precious in this house. Back in the foyer, Walter's booming voice carried again. He was on the phone, pacing near the front stairwell. "I'm not putting Danica on the design side," he said. "She's a liability creative. Overthinks, no scalability. You know the type." I froze. He laughed at whatever the caller said next. "No, no drama. She's harmless and grateful." Grateful. I moved back before he could see me. I didn't need to hear more. I'd heard enough over the past 10 years to fill volumes. Dinner prep began just before sunset. Helen floated between table settings and cocktail trays, directing servers like a conductor. I found myself setting napkins because no one asked. But someone always assumed I would. Bradley sauntered in with a glass of bourbon, smiling at everyone but me. "Smells great in here," he said, clapping Helen's shoulder. "Tell the chef it's 5-star tonight." "It's your father's recipe, actually," she beamed. "He's roasting it himself this year. Tradition." Tradition meant Bradley got a toast. I got the cleanup roster. I took a quiet breath, standing near the marble island, and tried to enter the conversation the only way I could, by earning it. "I actually signed 3 new clients this quarter," I said lightly, "including a historic preservation group from—" "Let's raise a glass." Walter's voice boomed. "To Bradley. The next chapter in Miller leadership. May he bring clarity where there's been clutter." The whole kitchen turned. I stood frozen, my mouth slightly open, one hand on the silverware tray. My father lifted his glass. Helen joined. A smattering of cousins clinked glasses. Claire didn't move. Danica stares at her untouched glass. "Tomorrow," I thought. "Let him finish his toast. Then I'll start my exit." My grandmother taught me to bake with purpose. Turns out nothing tastes sweeter than a turning point. The morning sky stretched a little too blue, the kind of clear that feels artificial, like someone dialed up the saturation to sell a version of perfection. The Miller estate buzzed with catered efficiency. White tents, folding chairs, centerpieces with miniature flags, and the unmistakable aroma of smoked meat curling through the air. It was the kind of American celebration that looked flawless from a drone shot, and it always made me feel invisible up close. I placed my strawberry shortcake, layered by hand, topped with mint, just like Grandma Ruth taught me, on the kitchen island beside a tray of branded cookies from one of Walter's corporate sponsors. I'd woken at 5 a.m. to hull and slice each berry myself. Helen glanced at it briefly while giving directions to a young server. "Oh, lovely, Danica. That'll go on the overflow table inside." I blinked. It's been a family staple since... "We just don't want too many desserts crowding the main line," she said gently, as though placating a child. "And Patricia Caldwell brought her lemon bars, so..." I nodded, the smile automatic. "Of course." Camille appeared beside me, sunglasses pushed up in her curls. "Overflow table, huh?" "She said it nicely," I murmured. "She always does," Camille replied, touching my arm. "It still stings." We walked the perimeter of the patio. I played my role well, offering polite waves, smiling at distant cousins, avoiding Walter's line of sight. The only real eye contact I shared was with Claire, seated in a shaded corner, sipping iced tea as if this were a casual anthropology expedition. Her gaze swept the space like a camera lens, catching everything. I felt like a ghost in the photos, present but unfocused. Camille leaned in. "You should tell them about the startup project, the one with the pre-seed funding and branding package. It's a win." I shook my head. "It won't matter." "Maybe not to them, but to you." Lunch was buffet style. Ribs, corn, coleslaw, laid out like a Norman Rockwell painting. I moved through the line behind Bradley, who was already regaling a neighbor with tales of his efficiency audit skills. I basically told the team, "If it can't be measured, it can't be managed," he said, tongs in hand, sounding like a parody of a podcast. At the long family table, I sat beside Camille and across from Walter. Claire sat a few places down, close enough to hear, distant enough to observe. I waited for the right moment, then spoke just above the conversation. I recently wrapped a full brand build for a startup focused on community-driven commerce. It was selected for a feature. Walter cut in, voice louder than necessary. "Failures like you don't get anything." The table fell quiet. My fork froze midway to my plate. He continued, as if explaining to a crowd, "You think I'd hand over Miller property to someone who designs logos for cupcake shops? Branding's not ownership, Danica. It's fluff." A few guests chuckled. Someone tried to cover it with a cough. Helen looked down at her lap. Camille's hand shot to my wrist, a grounding pulse. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct him. I didn't cry. I turned to him, meeting his eyes directly. That's all I needed to hear. Silence settled like ash. Claire stood moments later, approaching with deliberate calm. She placed an envelope on my napkin, her voice neutral. "In case you want a clearer picture of ownership." My fingers closed around it without breaking eye contact with Walter. Camille rose with me. Neither of us said goodbye. We walked back through the yard, past the smoker, past the flags, past the perfectly arranged chairs. No one stopped us. As they drove away, Camille asked, "What now?" Danica replies, "Now we make sure they remember what I built without them." While they toasted my brother's future, I was finalizing contracts they'd never see coming. The studio smelled faintly of coffee and fresh ink. Sunlight poured through the large industrial windows, pooling on the polished concrete floor and warming the edge of my desk. A cluster of mock-ups, hand-sketched site layouts, sample typography, earth-toned palettes were spread across the surface like puzzle pieces. I hadn't worn heels in weeks. I wore my hair up with no thought to polish, and there was no Helen here to suggest lipstick before guests arrived. This was my space, every inch of it humming with quiet defiance and deliberate rebuilding. Camille entered with 2 coffees, her hair pulled back in a messy twist. "You've been in here since dawn." Had to get the elevations adjusted. They wanted a tighter pedestrian flow between the community center and the green space. I took the coffee gratefully. "You know this is already better than anything in their catalog, right?" I smiled. "Doesn't matter what I know. Matters what Sheffield sees." She tilted her head. "And do they know who you are?" Number not yet. I opened the encrypted folder containing my proposal. That's the point. 3 weeks ago, Camille had slipped me the tip. Sheffield Partners, one of the largest regional development firms in the Northwest, was scouting for a creative lead on a community revitalization project. The land under consideration? A tract just outside the Miller estate. Formerly fallow, now ripe for redevelopment under a new zoning proposal. I'd submitted my materials anonymously, stripping every trace of my surname from the documents. What I left them was skill. Decisive, clean, strategic design work. Vision that spoke for itself. 2 days later, I'd received an invitation for a private meeting with their team. Under NDA, of course. "Your concept for historic integration is unusual," Mr. Tran had said during our first video call, seated in his pristine corner office. "You treated the land like it has memory. Not many designers think that way." "I don't build for monuments," I told him. "I build for echoes." They hired me by the end of the week. Now I had a title, creative lead, and a contract that secured my name in every piece of public collateral once the project launched. No one could erase me from this. Not again. I was layering in attribution clauses when my phone buzzed. Claire. "They're circling," she said without preamble. "Walter?" "Yes. He's making a push with the zoning board, trying to angle it as a legacy development. Claims Bradley will be leading the design front." I laughed under my breath. "Bradley can't even render a PowerPoint template." "Be careful," Claire warned. "They'll smell a leak if the wrong name shows up too soon." "They won't, not until April." She paused. "You've always been good at restraint." "No," I said, eyes on the blueprint before me. "I've learned when to stop asking permission." That evening, I rechecked the contract for the 3rd time. My lawyer's red lines, the branding clauses, the staged payments tied to key deliverables. Sheffield's upcoming gala in April would mark the first public showcase, complete with press coverage and city officials. The unveiling wouldn't just include project renders, it would include me. Camille arrived late with sushi and a chilled bottle of champagne. "You ready for this?" "More than ready." She popped the cork. Foam spilled down her fingers as she laughed. "Guess they're about to find out what failure builds." Danica raises her glass. "Let them choke on surprise." They never asked where I'd gone, so I let my name answer for me. Center stage. The Civic Center buzzed with the soft murmur of suits and sequins. Glasses clinked. Brochures fluttered. Spotlights swung gently above the polished wood floor, glinting off floral centerpieces and the deep navy of Sheffield Partners' branded stage. It was the kind of event Walter thrived in. Controlled, high visibility, loaded with opportunity to shake the right hands. I stood in the green room, adjusting the line of my blazer in the mirror. Hair pinned back. No jewelry, no apologies. Camille gave me a final once-over before slipping out through the side door, whispering into her headset. Behind her, Sheffield staff were organizing name tags and prepping cue cards. "They'll be in their seats now," she said just before the door shut. "Claire's front left." I breathed in. Then exhaled everything I hadn't said for 3 decades. The event had already been underway for 30 minutes. Welcome speeches, donor acknowledgements, an introduction to the Regional Revitalization Initiative. Sheffield had timed it like theater, and the act they were about to unveil wasn't for entertainment. It was for record. Claire's warning echoed through my mind as I took position behind the curtain. If you wait to be invited, you'll miss your moment. The MC stepped to the podium. His voice echoed crisply over the audio system. And now, he said, we're proud to introduce the creative lead and project ambassador behind this historic redevelopment initiative. Her work speaks to the soul of community, legacy, and innovation. Please welcome Danica Miller. Silence. Then a ripple, and not the polite kind. I stepped onto the stage. From behind the lights, I could feel it. The sharp collective intake of breath, the shuffle of confused movement. Some gasps. One low, incredulous chuckle I knew belonged to Bradley. And somewhere in the center of the crowd, I felt Walter sit forward, bristling with the recognition that something had slipped through his fingers without warning. Good. The first slide behind me shifted to an aerial rendering of the land. Clean, modular pathways curving through restored orchard lines, new community centers with weathered wood facades. Modern, grounded, human. I began without preamble. Legacy isn't what we build for ourselves, I said evenly. It's what we leave that others can use. This project blends preservation and purpose. It remembers who we were, without being trapped by it. I walked the crowd through each phase: land access, community design boards, job training hubs, ecological benchmarks. My voice didn't waver. Not when I saw Helen's hands stiffly clasped in her lap. Not when Bradley's mouth twisted in visible confusion. Not even when Walter tried to rise, likely to object. Two Sheffield legal advisors intercepted him at the aisle, speaking softly but firmly. He sat back down, reddening with restrained rage. I turned to the final slide, an artist's depiction of the completed site, layered with names of participating partners. And there it was, dead center, creative direction, Danica Miller. I let the name hang. Then looked straight at Walter. Turns out, failure builds things that matter too. A beat of silence. Then the room erupted into applause. A camera flash caught Walter mid-scowl, his mouth half open in disbelief. Somewhere behind him, I saw Claire give the slightest, satisfied nod. Danica turns, unfazed. Let the coverage write itself. My father used silence like a leash, but I learned to walk without one. The Sheffield conference room was designed for intimidation. Walls the color of wet stone, a single mahogany table stretched like a battlefield between opposing sides. No art, no softness, just reflections in the polished surface and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I sat at the far end, documents arranged in a precise fan before me. Camille was to my left, tablet in hand, her focus razor sharp. Claire flanked my right, already thumbing through the folder she'd brought. Weathered pages, legal letters, the kinds of records that outlived memory. Walter entered 5 minutes late, as if control could still be maintained by something as small as timing. His suit was perfect, his jaw tighter than usual. Helen followed a pace behind, eyes unreadable, fingers worrying the strap of her purse. He didn't sit immediately, just stood behind the empty chair opposite me, scanning the room like a general sizing up terrain. You went behind my back, he began. I said nothing. You humiliated this family. Still, I said nothing. You used your name and my land to push some artsy vanity project. I followed every legal protocol, I cut in calmly. My submission was anonymous, vetted, approved on merit. Not once did I use the Miller name as leverage. He laughed, harsh, bitter. You expect me to believe this wasn't calculated? I expect you to believe the paper trail. I slid the top contract toward him. Here's the NDA. Here are the time-stamped emails, every step recorded. You can check them against the metadata. He snatched the document but didn't open it. So this is revenge? No, I said. This is reclamation. Claire leaned forward, her voice cool. I have something else you'll want to see. She unfolded 3 documents with slow precision. Old paper. Copied signatures. This is a copy of Ruth Miller's original will, she said. Before it was amended. Before you removed my name. And Danica's Walter's mouth tightened. I found it in the county archive, she continued. Seems someone didn't file the updated version with full transparency. Convenient. You had no right, Walter said through clenched teeth. You had no shame, Claire replied, her tone still even. We both brought what we brought. Helen spoke for the first time. I remember, she said quietly, when you did that to Claire. I stayed silent then. I won't now. Everyone turned to her, even Walter. I told myself it was for peace, she said, eyes still on the table. But it was cowardice, and it cost more than I thought. A long silence settled like dust. Walter straightened. You think this design makes you a legacy? No, I said. I think surviving you does. He scoffed. I kept my gaze steady. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what survives your control. The sentence dropped like a pin into a vacuum. Walter's hands curled against the chair back. His lips thinned. Then he turned, said nothing further, and strode toward the door. Just before crossing the threshold, he muttered without facing me. You'll regret this. Danica replies without turning. Not once so far. They used to call it worthless land. Funny how things change when someone else gives it purpose. The early summer sun cast gold across the gravel path, warming the wooden archway that marked the entrance to Landlight Collective. Lavender and wild grasses swayed along the edge of the lot, and the mural stretched wide across the studio's front wall. An oak tree with open branches, its roots tangled in wind, not chains. A tree without fences. Rooted, but free. I stood beneath it, fingers curled loosely around the clipboard I didn't need. Camille had already handled the logistics. Parking, press kits, canapes. Everything was ready. But still, I lingered on the threshold, letting the silence hold me for a breath longer. It had taken nearly a year, a full pivot, from erasure to emergence. And not on Millerland, not under Walter's name. This space had been built from invoices I signed, late nights I kept, and savings I refused to spend on permission. Camille appeared beside me in a linen dress the color of wild honey. She slipped her arm through mine. You ready? I've been ready, I said. Just didn't know it. The crowd had begun to gather. Locals, artists, a handful of regional journalists, community organizers, no Miller associates, no extended family. Except one. Claire stood near the garden beds, her hands clasped over her stomach. She looked radiant in silver, her face softened by something deeper than pride. Peace. Inside, the main space glowed with filtered light through floor-length windows. Canvases lined the brick walls, showcasing community artists. A round-table workspace sat in the center, inviting hands to sketch, to build. The gallery had cost less than a house in the suburbs, but it held more worth than all the Miller acreage combined. A small wooden box sat on the welcome table. Camille opened it slowly and pulled out a letter. It's from your mom. I paused. Camille handed it over, along with a small velvet pouch. She asked me to give this to you when things were real. The note was short. Neat, looping script. Danica, you built something he couldn't control. I'm glad someone finally did. This ring was your grandmother's. I think you know that. Now it's yours. Love, Mom. The ring was delicate, rose gold, old-fashioned, with a small sapphire in the center. The one Ruth wore for every holiday and every hard year. I slid it on my finger. Not a trophy. A tether to something I'd reclaimed. Outside, the ribbon cutting was beginning. Camille gave me a nod as she walked out to greet the guests. I followed a few minutes later, stepping into the hum of voices, flashes of camera phones, laughter spilling over from a food truck line. Bradley was standing near the back, hands in his pockets. Awkward, overdressed. Our eyes met. He lifted one hand in a half wave. I nodded. Nothing more. Some things weren't meant to be fixed, only clarified. Claire reached for my hand as I stepped forward. She squeezed it once. You did it, sweetheart. This isn't inheritance. I whispered, glancing down at my hand. It's intention. A few minutes later, as the ceremony wound down, a woman with a press badge approached. She tapped her recorder, hopeful. Excuse me, are you the daughter Walter Miller disowned? Danica smiles. No. I'm the woman who stopped waiting for his permission. They called it worthless land, and her an afterthought. But when the curtain fell, the only name the crowd remembered was the one they had tried hardest to forget. Justice didn't arrive with shouting or vengeance. It came in contracts, in murals, in unshakable presence. Like roots beneath soil long ignored, the truth had taken hold quietly, then bloomed where no one thought it would. If this story stirred something in you, like, share, and subscribe. And drop a 1 in the comments if you've ever had to rise from silence to be seen.